My wife wanted an open marriage, and I was dead set against it. To my utter shock, she stormed off and brought her lover right to my face, asking if I wanted to join them. Just when she thought I'd blow my top and demand a divorce, I chuckled. I said, "Honey, I thought you were testing me. You should have just said so." I waved my hand. "You two, come meet the senior Mrs. Sincere." At the company's annual party, Victoria was clinging to Ethan, the general manager. They were whispering sweet nothings, and Victoria giggled, playfully punching Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan, you're impossible," she'd say. I stood in a corner, sipping a cocktail, my gaze fixed on them. Victoria noticed my stare, composed herself, smoothed her black dress, and took Ethan's arm. Ethan smirked, leading Victoria over to me. "Sorry, Sin, for hogging Victoria for so long. Here she is back to you," he said, patting Victoria's shoulder and pushing her towards me. Ethan winked at me. "Sin, Victoria and I were just talking business. I hope you're not upset." Victoria scoffed. "Of course not, he's so understanding." In front of me, Victoria wrapped her arms around Ethan again, defiant and tilting her head. "It's raining outside. Ethan will drive me home later. You can find your own way back." It was March, and the weather in South City was always unpredictable. Neon lights outside blurred through the drizzling rain, forming countless scattered spots of light, grating on my nerves. I looked away from the window and at Victoria's hand. Her fingers were long, white, and delicate, her skin smooth, draped over Ethan's arm. It was like a piece of art in his possession. Such hands, such a face. No wonder I had fallen head over heels for her. I had chased Victoria for 9 years, from 16 to 25. She was my entire youth. In my most obsessed moments, I would fly back from overseas for 10 hours just to be with her. One time, I knocked on Victoria's apartment door, flowers in my left hand and breakfast in my right. "Good morning, Victoria," I greeted her. She stared at me surprised. "Oh, what are you doing here?" Victoria was wearing a white mesh-pleated skirt with a cropped light blue cardigan, making her look innocent. But she was also pulling a small suitcase, her dark hair loosely pinned up, with a few strands hanging down her face, as if she were about to travel. I handed her the flowers. "Didn't you ask me to come?" The night before, Victoria had called me for 3 hours. She must have been drunk. Her voice was soft. She'd whimpered, "Sincere, I wish you were here with me. I miss you so much. Please come back and be with me, okay?" After knowing each other for so long, this was the first time Victoria had told me that she missed me. Over the phone, my heart was thumping in my ears. After hanging up, I was overjoyed and immediately packed my bags and bought the earliest flight home. I didn't sleep a wink on the plane. When I closed my eyes, all I saw was Victoria's bright and beautiful face. She was upset. She said she missed me and needed me. Was she finally going to accept me? How should I act when I saw her? I was anxious and overwhelmed. I frowned one moment and smiled foolishly the next, rehearsing my lines over and over again in front of the mirror. "Victoria, I'm back. I'm never leaving again. I'll be by your side forever, okay?" But not a single word of my rehearsed lines came out of my mouth. Victoria brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and chuckled. "I was just kidding. Why did you come back at this time?" She tossed the flowers onto the shoe rack near the door. I'm meeting friends for a road trip in the Rocky Mountains. I'm going to be late, so I need to get going." Victoria brushed past me to the elevator. I stood frozen. "Road trip? But didn't you say that you were upset?" She nodded. "Yes, when I'm upset, I need to go out and relax." With a ding, the elevator doors opened. 2 of Victoria's friends walked out, arm in arm. One said, "Vicky, the car's downstairs. I need to use your restroom first." The other said, "Oh, Sincere, what are you doing here? Are you joining us?" Crystal frowned and nudged Victoria with her elbow, winking at her. "Weren't we going with those hot guys?" Victoria shook her head, turned back and opened the apartment door. "Sincere isn't coming with us." The girls went into the living room. I heard Crystal's hushed voice saying, "He flew all night to get back here for you. This is not right." Victoria pouted. "Did I ask him to come back?" Another one of Victoria's friends laughed. "Don't worry, Sincere won't be upset." Over the years, our Vicky can call on him whenever she wants and he'll be there. What can he say? Victoria nodded nonchalantly. Yeah, just ignore him. He showed up out of the blue, didn't even tell anyone. He's such a nutcase. Her voice was soft, the three dismissive words cutting like an ice dagger. I felt a chill crawl from my head to my toes. I clutched the breakfast bag in my hand and forced a smile. All my expectations of happiness had vanished. One word from Victoria and I would be a nervous wreck, consumed by anxiety. Yet, in her eyes, I was nothing more than a lovesick puppy. I tossed a full bag of breakfast into the trash, blocked and deleted all of Victoria's contacts, then booked the quickest flight out of Charleston. In my mind, Victoria was a chapter closed in the story of my life. For the following period, I stuck to the plan, staying overseas for work as my elders had arranged. But unbelievably, 1 month later, Victoria was right in front of me again. She didn't say anything extra, just went straight to the point, asking if I still liked her and then further if I'd marry her. She said she felt like a real jerk and that the past month had been hell. She confessed that she had never realized how important I was to her before. My head told me to investigate further, but this was Victoria, my entire passionate youth. So, I proposed. The night before our wedding, she went out clubbing with her girlfriends for a bachelorette party and didn't come home all night, because she knew that all she had to do was bat her eyes at me the next day. After all these years, no matter how far she went, the moment she'd look at me with those pleading eyes and flutter her lashes, all my anger would melt away instantly. She took my love for granted, pushing her luck every time. A few days ago, she even suggested an open marriage. It began when I found a picture Ethan had sent on her phone. It was a photo of a furry handcuff, and Ethan had written, "Let's try this next time. Babe?" I thrust the phone screen in front of Victoria and demanded what it meant. She started by yelling at me, calling me crazy for snooping in her phone and questioning if there was any trust left between us. When she saw my cold stare, she switched to a pitiful voice saying, "Don't misunderstand. Ethan must have sent it to the wrong person." I scoffed, and Victoria instantly stood up and snarled, "Fine, if that's what you want to think, there's nothing I can do. I'm not going to bother explaining." With that, she reached for her phone, but accidentally hit the call button. Ethan picked up instantly, his voice oozing with affection. "Baby, I have so many other props ready. Aren't you excited?" Victoria went pale, frantically hanging up. We looked at each other in silence for a moment, then she tossed her phone away, adopting a brazen, "I'm not backing down" attitude, saying, "Ethan's my boyfriend." I was shocked at her bluntness and blurted out, "Don't you care about basic morality?" She seemed liberated by revealing the truth and challenged me, "What is morality? What is right and wrong?" I retorted, "It's simple. If you wouldn't want someone else doing it to you, it's wrong. I don't steal because I don't want to be stolen from. I don't hurt others because I don't want to be hurt." She scoffed, "That's easy to disprove. If I don't care if someone steals from me, then stealing is okay." She went on, "Let's put it this way, Sincere. You can get a girlfriend and we can each do our own thing. I'm fine with that." Victoria said she was not a traditional woman. She was a modern woman and wouldn't be a good wife for my sake. She even said that sex and love were separate. An open marriage would be beneficial for our relationship. She argued that love is an emotion and sex is a sensation. Emotions take time to cultivate, while a sensation can be instantly triggered. Like having a favorite dish. If she made it for me every day, wouldn't I get tired of it? Wouldn't I want something spicy and exciting to spice things up? That way I can try others' food, and other people can taste mine. Our lives would be romantic and interesting. I gritted my teeth. "So you care only about pleasure and nothing about morals?" She sneered back, "It's the modern age. Why do you hold on to such outdated thinking? We live to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Therefore, seeking pleasure is the greatest good, and going against our instincts, sacrificing our natural desires, is the greatest evil." I countered, If seeking pleasure is the greatest good, then ruining someone else's happiness and causing pain is the greatest evil. Is your logic consistent?" She rolled her eyes. "If morality is so absolute and objective, then the men of ancient times were immoral for having multiple wives, right? Why is it that when women do it, you get so upset?" In the end, Victoria said, "Sincere, think it over. I'm doing this for your own good. Other men would be happy to have such an understanding wife. You're the one being picky. Victoria and I were financially entangled, and a divorce wouldn't be simple. Our families also had business ties. A fair division of property wouldn't be done quickly." Victoria was aware of this, so she didn't mention divorce. Instead, she kept highlighting the benefits of an open marriage. I refused, but she continued relentlessly. She tried to poo me, first by calling and texting Ethan in front of me. Today at the company's annual gala, she brazenly brought him right to my face. Ethan, unaware that Victoria and I had already had an honest conversation, thought he was doing a great job keeping it secret. He tried to brush it off. "Victoria, you're taking this joke too far. It's not about being magnanimous or not, Sin. Victoria and I are completely innocent. Don't overthink it." In front of everyone at the company, Ethan still wanted to save face, so he made a few jokes to steer clear of Victoria and went to chat with some colleagues. Victoria kept her eyes glued to his back. She asked me, "How are you thinking about what I said?" I frowned, too tired to argue with her anymore. Victoria sighed. "Sincere, please don't be so stubborn." I swirled the drink in my glass, ignoring her. I asked, "You two have both been drinking. How are you getting home?" Victoria's gaze shifted to my glass, and it dawned on her, "Oh yeah, I almost forgot you didn't say." She reached over, grabbed my glass, and casually placed it on the nearby windowsill. "You haven't had any drinks tonight, right? You can drive us home later." I thought I must have misheard. I asked, speechless, "What are you talking about?" Victoria took a step closer, standing right in front of me. She tilted her head up, her eyes hazy, and stared into mine. "I said you can drive Ethan and me to his place later." I should be angry, but I didn't feel anything. I reached out, creating some distance between Victoria and I, and looked down at her as I replied, "Sure, but I've had a bit to drink too. I'll have a friend come drive you guys." Victoria froze, the reflection of the neon lights outside reflecting in her eyes, turning into tiny glittering points. She said, surprised, "You agree?" I nodded calmly. Victoria said, full of joy, "You're the best, my darling husband. Wait for me a moment. You and Ethan go downstairs first. He's a bit drunk. Take care of him." Victoria and us reached the elevator when she suddenly remembered something. She pulled a scarf from her bag and handed it to Ethan. She said sweetly, "Ethy, it's been so cold lately. I knitted this scarf for you. Would you wear it?" Ethan quickly shook his head, looking awkward as he said, "Victoria, this isn't really appropriate. Maybe it's better for Sin." Victoria glanced at me. She said disdainfully, "He's thick-skinned, out in the wind and sun every day. He's used to it and doesn't feel the cold. Never mind him." Ethan rushed to speak on my behalf. "Victoria, Sin has worked so hard outside all these years. You really shouldn't say that about him." As the elevator doors closed, Ethan's respectful look was instantly gone. He smoothed out the scarf, gently rubbing it with his thumb, and then he suddenly chuckled, "Sincere, you're so pathetic. See? Victoria treats me way better than she treats you. You don't even know we." I interrupted coldly, "I know. Victoria told me everything." Ethan's eyes widened in shock. "You know? You know everything? Then why?" He paused, half smug, half disdainful. "I see. You can't bear to divorce her, so you're turning a blind eye." Ethan smirked, mocking me, saying if he were me, he would have divorced his wife long ago for blatantly having an affair. He started counting on his fingers, listing Victoria and his past. "The day you got sick, Victoria said she had a stomachache and couldn't come see you, but she was actually at a movie with me. The day of your birthday, Victoria said she had to work late, but she was actually out racing cars with me. At the Rose Corporation, Victoria has been secretly helping me climb the corporate ladder. That's how I became the manager. And Victoria is happy to be my little secretary, flirting with me at the office all day. Don't think she's some big boss daughter. Whatever I say, Victoria does not dare disagree. I even decide when she's allowed to go home to you." Ethan laughed. "You can only get the leftovers from me." He was smug and full of anticipation, waiting for me to break down. I just glanced at him calmly. "Are you done?" He frowned. "Yeah," I said nonchalantly. "Leftovers? Please, I've been eating this dish in different ways for years. You're just drinking the soup. What's there to be proud of?" He was furious and raged. "Sincere, what are you pretending? Sincere, you are way too good at pretending. If you really don't care about Victoria, why not divorce her? You're just jealous that your wife ran off with me. That's why you won't admit defeat and let her go." Ethan's words grew more and more offensive. Luckily, the elevator reached the first floor just in time, and a crowd of people poured in. Ethan immediately shut his mouth, put on a humble expression again, adjusted his scarf, and walked out of the hotel. After Victoria came downstairs, Ethan switched back to his doting mode, put his arm around her shoulder and said, "Victoria, are you really going home with me and leaving Sincere here alone?" Victoria adjusted his scarf again and asked, "What should we do then?" Ethan smirked. "Why don't we just take him with us?" Victoria poked Ethan's hand hard. "You're being such a brat. I swear I'll ignore you." Victoria pouted, but there was a glint of anticipation in her eyes as she glanced at Ethan. Ethan chuckled, pulling her closer. "All right, tonight it's just the two of us." A light drizzle was falling and the hotel portico was deserted, allowing them to flirt shamelessly, completely oblivious to my presence. Suddenly, headlights sliced through the rain, and a stretched Rolls-Royce pulled up at the hotel entrance. As the door opened, Victoria's expression shifted dramatically. "Sophie?" she exclaimed in surprise. Sophie was the younger cousin of Victoria's best friend, Crystal. Despite being 5 years younger, Victoria never dared to act superior around her because Sophie's family was incredibly influential. Sophie's father was the wealthiest man in Southtown. While Victoria's and Crystal's families were well off, Sophie's was in a league of its own, and they rarely socialized. Victoria clearly didn't think Sophie was the friend I'd mentioned, so she rushed forward, attempting to hug her. "Sophie, what are you doing here at this hour?" she asked. Sophie ignored her, shooting me a slightly annoyed look instead. "It's freezing out. Aren't you worried about catching a cold?" she grumbled, pulling a scarf from her bag, which she must have prepared ahead. She tiptoed and wrapped it around my neck. "Get in the car already," she urged. I adjusted the scarf, pulling it tighter around my neck and shrinking my shoulders a bit. "Wait a moment. Have the driver take Ethan and Victoria home first." She nodded. "Yeah, let's get in first." The car was a lavish limousine with 2 rows of seats facing each other, separated by a small table with a bottle of red wine and 2 crystal glasses. Sophie and I sat on one side, while Ethan and Victoria sat across from us. Victoria was still dazed. "Wait a minute, when did you two get so close?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief. She paused, then questioned, "Sincere, is Sophie the friend you were talking about?" Sophie acted like she hadn't heard her, instead pulling my arm closer and playfully complaining. "Your hand is so cold," she pouted. "I forgot my gloves." She nodded, adding, "I guess we'll have to warm them up artificially." She then rubbed my hands between her small hands and nuzzled her head against my cheek. "Your face is freezing too. Why would you come to a party in this weather? Wouldn't it be better to stay home?" Victoria's eyes widened, her pupils contracting as she leaned forward, her face etched with confusion. You, she stammered, unable to form a complete sentence. Ethan was the first to react. "Sincere, you have a wife. This isn't appropriate." Sophie furrowed her brow. "What's not appropriate?" she demanded. Ethan pointed at me. "Victoria is right here and you're being so affectionate in front of her. I can't imagine how you act behind her back. It's just immoral." Victoria, gritting her teeth, spat out the words, "Sincere, you owe me an explanation." I barely ate anything at the party. The warm air in the car and the leftover wine had me feeling a little tipsy. I reached out and put my arm around Sophie's shoulders. "Explain what?" I asked, while Sophie held my left hand in hers. Her hands were soft, her wrists fragrant, and her fingers were like tender shoots. A steady stream of warmth flowed through me. I let out a satisfied sigh, clutching her closer. "Sophie is my girlfriend," I announced, winking at her. "Actually, Victoria is the first wife. You should call her big sister." Sophie pursed her lips. "No way." Victoria looked like she'd been struck by lightning, her eyes fixed on our clasped hands. Her face contorted with anger. "Girlfriend? When did that happen?" she choked out. I frowned. "Isn't this an open marriage like you said? Why are you asking so many questions?" Just then the car came to a stop. The driver's voice came through the partition. "Ms. Sophie, we've arrived at the Lanting Apartments." I nodded. "Okay, everyone out of the car." I was getting a headache and didn't want to argue with them. Victoria was fuming, reaching out to grab my arm. "When did you get a girlfriend? You have to explain it to me." Ethan grabbed her arm, trying to calm her down. "Victoria, just let him go. This kind of scum isn't worth your time. Just divorce him and be done with it." Ethan was already out of the car, pulling Victoria out after him. She was already standing, but Ethan's tug sent her stumbling backwards out of the car. Victoria, falling backwards, landed awkwardly on the pavement. Ethan frantically rushed over to help, but Victoria slapped him across the face. "Ethan, who do you think you are, putting your hands on me? Get out of here." She then yelled at me, "Sincere, you come out here right now." Sophie slammed the car door shut, the driver hit the gas and the car sped forward. Through the window, I saw Victoria in her heels. Her high heels pounded the pavement as she chased the car, cursing and throwing her phone and purse at it, but none of them hit. During the chase, she slipped, falling face first onto the ground. Sophie nudged me, turning my head towards her, glaring at me. "Don't look at her, look at me," she huffed. I chuckled. "What's with the jealousy?" Sophie snorted. "I am jealous. When are you two getting divorced?" I silenced her nagging with a kiss. Sophie's breath was sweet, her lips soft, an irresistible lure. From soft murmurs to rapid breaths, the air filled with desire. She straddled me, I gripped her waist, and our heated breaths fogged the car windows. Just as things were about to get even more intense, my phone vibrated incessantly beneath us. Annoyed, I fished it out from between the seats. Answered without looking. "Sincere." Victoria's trembling voice came through the line. "You need to come home right now." Sophie buried her face in my neck, kissing me, her hand trailing up my arm to my wrist before snatching the phone. "I don't want to hear her voice," she pouted. "Okay, I'll turn it off," I replied. I didn't go home that night, nor did I turn my phone back on. The next morning, after Sophie left, I lazily turned on my phone. Victoria had sent a barrage of messages. I deleted them all without reading. Victoria and I, though married, still operated our own companies as before, but with deep collaborations. Recently, we'd even jointly invested to acquire a small company for a backdoor listing. Now that I wanted out of the marriage, severing our intertwined finances would be a long and arduous process. I stayed at the office for days, avoiding home. Finally, Victoria, unable to contain herself, stormed into my office. I glanced up from the mess of papers, barely acknowledging her. "What do you want?" I asked. Victoria suppressed her anger, coldly demanding, "Why haven't you been answering my calls?" "I'm busy. What do you need?" I retorted. She looked terrible, her hair disheveled, eyes red, face drawn. Rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand, she approached the desk, leaning close. "I'm asking you, what's going on between you and Sophie?" she asked. I scoffed, meeting her gaze. "What's going on with you and Ethan?" I countered. "Whatever is going on with us is the same as what's going on with me and Sophie. Open marriage, remember? You were the one who suggested it, Victoria. Can't handle it?" Victoria stared, half questioning, half annoyed. She bit her lip. Yes, I suggested it, but that was just this month. The way you and Sophie are, it seems like more than a month-long relationship. I countered, what about you and Ethan? How long has that been going on? I couldn't even spare her another glance, returning to my paperwork. We're adults. I'm busy. I don't have time for these arguments. If you can't handle it, let's get divorced. Stop causing drama. Victoria paused, then chuckled. Come on, Sincere. We've been together for years. I know you. Are you playing hard to get? Trying to get a rise out of me? Like when you blocked me 3 years ago? Her certainty was laced with a mocking grin. Seeing her like that, I felt a moment of confusion. 3 years ago, I was heartbroken, determined to leave for good. How could she think I was just playing a game? So when she sought me out back then, was it just a bruised ego and the frustration of losing the game? No wonder after we got married, Victoria would joke with her girlfriends about my cunning and skill. I never quite understood. One time I had a stomach ache and asked her to get me water, but she was too engrossed in watching TV and didn't hear me. I dragged myself out of bed, got my medicine and water. She glanced at me, coldly stating, "You can move, can't you? Stop acting like it's a big deal. It's good for you to move around." Holding my glass, I felt a surge of anger at her callousness. I spat out, "Victoria, if you hate me so much, why did you marry me?" Victoria, in the middle of a voice call with her friends, muttered, probably because my tone was too harsh. "Like I wanted to marry you. You tricked me into it." Over the phone, her girlfriends giggled. "He's quite the charmer, your husband," tricked Vicky. "Yeah, a smooth talker who plays young girls like a fiddle. You'll all have your day soon," Victoria said indifferently. At the time, I was focused on the stomach pain and didn't think much of it. Looking back, Victoria was always reluctant about our marriage. It wasn't a sudden realization of love after losing me, but more like a petulant reaction to the disappearance of a devoted admirer, so she didn't need to pretend anymore. Seeing me silent, Victoria assumed she had won, and visibly relaxed, her expression becoming smug. But then she remembered the last few days. Her distress was palpable, and she was clearly upset. She said, "Sincere, don't do that again. I don't like it. And stop looking at those stupid documents. Let's go home. Let's eat in tonight." Victoria snatched the papers from my hands. I glanced through the documents and realized an important contract was left at home. Fine, I thought. Let's just head home. Victoria called the housekeeper ahead of time to prepare dinner, rattling off a list of my favorite dishes. It felt like she was trying to appease me. On the way, no matter what Victoria said, I didn't argue. I closed my eyes and leaned back, trying to rest, but she, out of nowhere, started rambling again. "Open marriage was a decent concept, but you hiring someone to play a part is just unnecessary. It's embarrassing for you, Sincere. You should really try to connect with other women, not someone like Sophie. That girl, Sophie, she's got a million schemes running through her head. You can't control her. Why don't I introduce you to someone?" I replied, "No need." My refusal seemed to please her. She even hummed a tune happily as she got out of the car. The housekeeper had already prepared a feast, with a huge bouquet of flowers on the table. Victoria linked her arm with mine, acting proud, and said, "Today is our wedding anniversary. We should celebrate it properly." After we were seated, she started up again. "Sincere, marriage needs nurturing. Look at you. No romance, no flair. What are we going to do? We need to find a way to inject some new energy into our marriage. That's why I look for others. But you only have me in your world. How is that going to work?" I sighed, pouring myself a bowl of soup. "I have Sophie," I said. "It's not just you." Victoria shook her head and chuckled. Still being stubborn, "I already asked Crystal about it. Sophie owes you a favor from that snowy night a year ago." One snowy night, Victoria called, asking me to pick her up from a bar. I checked my phone. It was 1 in the morning. The house was warm, but outside, the wind was biting, and large snowflakes were falling. I told Victoria to just call a cab, but she said the roads were slippery, and even after offering extra money, no driver would pick her up. "Sincere, please come and get me," she insisted. "I can't." So I braved the storm and drove to find her. When I got to the bar, I couldn't reach her on her phone. I parked the car and, battling the freezing wind, I walked around to the back alley of the bar. There I saw a young couple locked in a passionate kiss. The man was panting, "Miss Victoria, my apartment isn't far from here. Let's go to my place." The woman gasped, "I can't. My husband is coming to get me. You should go first." Then she whispered something in his ear. He laughed softly. "Really? You little vixen, you'll be the death of me." They embraced each other. The umbrella I was holding slipped from my hand and fell to the ground. The snow fell, covering my head, and soon a thin layer of frost had formed on my hair. I was freezing cold. It was on that same snowy night that I found Sophie. Her car broke down, stranded on the side of the road, and roadside assistance was taking forever. I offered her a ride home. The next day, she invited me to lunch as a thank you. Gradually, we started to become friends. Victoria, having heard about this, mistakenly thought that was the extent of my relationship with Sophie. Her good mood was evident. She said, "I am a modern woman. If you actually find another woman, I really wouldn't mind. In fact, I would be happy for you, but you shouldn't use Sophie as a lie to stir up trouble like that. It will only bring you more problems in the future." She was interrupted by the ringing of her phone. She swiped to answer it and paused for a second before turning on the speakerphone. "Hello," said a voice on the other end. "Victoria, I've got a bad cold and I'm in a lot of pain," Ethan's raspy voice said. He paused and added, "You haven't come to see me these past few days. Did I do something wrong?" Ethan's voice had lost all its previous arrogance and now sounded somewhat aggrieved. It seemed that the slap I gave him the other day really set him straight. Victoria raised an eyebrow and glanced at me, her eyes gleaming with a hint of triumph. She cooed, "Don't be silly. Why would you say that? I'll come to you soon." She hung up the phone. "Didn't you say that since it's our anniversary we should stay home and celebrate?" I asked. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Ethan needs me to take care of him. Don't be so petty. Everything I said earlier was pointless. Only when Ethan is happy, I will be happy, and then our marriage will be good. How many times do I have to explain that to you?" I double-checked with her. "So you are really going to Ethan's?" Victoria stood up, grabbing her bag. "I don't have time to explain it to you, Sincere. You need to think clearly." After Victoria left, I looked at my phone with a sigh. You should have said so, I thought. I've got a little vixen that's been nagging me and wouldn't leave me alone until I went to have dinner with her. As soon as my car was parked, Rose stormed out, opening the door and grabbing my arm. "Sincere, you haven't come to see me for days. Have you forgotten about me?" I held up my hands in surrender. "No, absolutely not. Work has been crazy lately. Rose, she's my college buddy from overseas and one of Victoria's closest friends. We came back to the States together. Rose, being Victoria's bestie, even worked at Victoria's company for a while, but then they had a falling out, and Rose went back home to live the life of a princess. Unlike Victoria, Rose is an only child, set to inherit her family's corporation. Of course, that's not why I'm with her. I'm into her because, well, she's the most gorgeous of all Victoria's friends. Back when they were still close, Victoria used to joke about Rose becoming an influencer or a star, saying she'd blow up. They hung out a lot back then, and Rose and I got along great. It's hard to pinpoint when things shifted. Maybe it was that night we had too much to drink, or maybe it was just plain old lust. After a party, I drove Rose home, and things escalated naturally. Afterwards, Rose was crying, demanding I take responsibility. She's incredibly clingy and I can't seem to shake her off, and maybe I don't really want to. Rose practically yanked me out of the car. She said, "Honey, I cooked us a feast, and after we eat, I'm introducing you to some friends." I groaned. "Do I really have to? Can't we just chill at home?" She replied, "Why? Am I so embarrassing that you want to hide me away?" I sighed, pushing her away. "I'm still married to Victoria." Rose scoffed. "Well, she's being all public about her own stuff. What are you so scared of?" Just my luck. As we reached the elevator, we ran into Victoria and Ethan, all lovey-dovey, holding hands and leaning on each other. Victoria was shocked to see us. Then she got all indignant. "Sincere, what do you think you're doing? Did you follow us here?" Ethan frowned. "Seriously? This is way too much. Why don't you just put a leash on Vicky and keep her at home?" Victoria pouted, saying, "Didn't you hear anything I said?" Then, pointing toward the garage, she bit her lip and said, "Get lost right now." It took me a minute to realize. Victoria's family has a place here. This complex is one of the swankiest in South City, right near the mall, with the best schools. Even the smallest units are massive. When we first got married, she'd asked me if I wanted to move in here, but I'd said no, that I was comfortable in my own villa and to rent it out instead. I'd even forgotten about it. Turns out, she didn't rent it, but she's been using it to shack up with Ethan. My face was grim. Ethan, seeing this, just got cockier, hugging Victoria closer, saying, "It doesn't matter where you chase us, Vicky's not going back to you." Victoria cuddled into his arms and said, "Ethy's right, I'm not going back to you." She then glared at me, all impatient. "Sincere, why can't you just move on? Acting like this just makes me hate you more." Rose interjected, Excuse me." She waved her hand to get Victoria's attention. Then, after a pause, she added, "Is it possible that he wasn't here to see you?" Victoria was confused. "Rose?" Victoria then realized it was her. It took her a few seconds to process before realizing Rose lived in this building and she was the one who suggested she buy a place here. So seeing her here wasn't that big of a shock. Seeing Rose here made Victoria even less keen to air her dirty laundry. She quickly made up an excuse, saying that she and Ethan were just chatting about work, but Sincere got suspicious and came to follow them. Then she giggled, all embarrassed. "Vicky, you understand, Sincere's just too controlling and suspicious." Rose asked, "Oh, really?" Then she gave me a sarcastic look, not holding back as she pinched my arm hard. "Sincere, why aren't you controlling with me?" I rolled my eyes. All right, don't listen to her." I pressed the elevator button, calmly explaining to Victoria, "It's a misunderstanding. I'm here to see Rose, not you. You do your thing and leave me be, all right?" Victoria's eyes were fixed on Rose's arm that was linked with mine, her brain practically short-circuiting. The elevator doors opened with a ding. I pulled Rose inside, and Victoria quickly followed us, asking, "Wait a minute, what do you mean? You two?" Ethan looked from me to Rose, then to Victoria, his face a canvas of confusion. "Vicky," he paused, his tone laced with complexity. "Can't you see it? Rose and Sophie are the same." Rose immediately got annoyed. She stomped her foot, whining, "Shut up! Who is Sophie? How dare you compare me to her, some two-timing opportunist? We are childhood sweethearts. Our bond is unbreakable." She then gripped my hand and declared, "Sincere, we agreed that once you divorce Victoria, you'd consider me first, right?" Victoria froze, her face turning red, then white. After a moment, she gasped. Taking a sharp breath, Victoria stepped back, her back pressing against the elevator wall. She trembled as she reached out. You two, Sincere, are you using Rose again to play these games? Do you take me for a fool? I told you, stop this nonsense, just stop." Victoria couldn't finish her sentence because Rose rose on her tiptoes, wrapped her arms around Sincere's neck, and kissed him. He, in turn, cupped her face, returning the passionate kiss. It was only when the elevator doors opened that Sincere half-carried Rose out. Victoria stood there, dumbfounded and furious, chasing after them. "This is impossible, you two. How can this be? Rose, Sincere is my husband." Rose, leaning on Sincere's shoulder, gave Victoria a very sly look. "So what?" Ethan, standing nearby, chimed in, jumping up and down. "You are both so shameless," Rose scoffed. "We're all homewreckers here. What makes you so noble? Do you even have the face to say that about me?" Ethan's face turned crimson. He gritted his teeth. "You're the homewrecker. Victoria and I are true love." Rose gave him a disgusted look. "True love what? What are you even? You have no ability, no personality. You depend on Victoria for everything, even your job at the Lou Corporation, right? Isn't that embarrassing? Unlike me, I only care about my brother. I can't bear to let him spend a single dollar on me. I am the real love here. You are just a gold digger." Ethan was speechless, stunned. Victoria, her anger boiling over, said, "When did you two start this? Sincere, you explain." He responded with annoyance, "Why dwell on the past? As the legal wife, can't you be more understanding? Be a smart woman, turn a blind eye. It's not like I'm not coming home, am I? You are pushing too hard, you're suffocating me. Do you really want to see this family fall apart?" Rose pouted. "Then hurry up and break up. When are you getting a divorce?" Sincere rubbed his temples. "See? They are eager for us to get divorced. Victoria, for the sake of this family, you better go back home." With that, he slammed the door in Victoria's face. Victoria, only then reacting, started banging on the door. "This isn't possible. Open the door, Sincere. Explain yourself. Open the door." Sincere ignored her. As Rose had already wrapped herself around him, the knocking faded away as they got further and further inside. Rose twisted her waist and directed him, "Focus." He rolled his eyes, speechless. An hour later, Rose, wearing an apron, was humming a tune in the kitchen, skillfully chopping vegetables while she asked again, "Between me and Sophie, who do you like more?" Sincere was immediately at a loss. After a moment of hesitation, he looked her in the eye. "Of course it's you. Sophie and I are just playing around. I'm serious about you." Rose was satisfied. "Come eat. It's all your favorites." After dinner, they snuggled for another hour. She checked her phone. "It's almost time. Let's go. I'll take you somewhere." Sincere changed his clothes and opened the door. The hallway's motion sensor light went on. He jumped in fright. "What are you still doing here?" Victoria was sitting on the floor in front of his door, her eyes bloodshot and her expression vacant. When she saw him, her eyes darted to his neck, her pupils suddenly contracting. Sincere covered the love bite. "What do you want?" he asked. Victoria's voice was hoarse, like she was swallowing shards of glass. "Sincere, let's talk." He nodded. "Okay, I want to talk too. Rose, go on ahead." Rose looked wronged, wanting to object, but she didn't dare. She could only pretend to be generous. "You promised to be with me today," she said. He replied, "I know, I won't stand you up." Victoria, looking dejected, took him to Southside High School. The school's back gate was by the river, and along the river was a night market. Sincere used to skip evening study sessions in high school to buy Victoria snacks here. Victoria loved roasted sweet potatoes. He would carefully hide the sweet potatoes in his coat, delivering them to the bottom of Victoria's dormitory. The sweet potatoes were still warm. He loved the bustling atmosphere of this street, and he often reminisced about the time when he was immersed in love. The first year they got married, they would still come here for supper. Victoria bought 2 roasted sweet potatoes. They walked shoulder to shoulder on the river bank. The wind was cold, but the roasted sweet potatoes were still warm. Sincere held the sweet potato, staring at the river, lost in thought. He didn't know when it started, but liking someone, making sacrifices for them, had become a shameful thing. People called it simping, and simps always get the short end of the stick. When you liked someone, you lost your sense of self, your own identity, and revolved only around them. It was pitiful, like a dog wagging its tail for scraps. Sincere used to agree, but now he was realizing that there was still a sense of self. That person who selflessly loved Victoria was still him. When he did things for her and saw her happy, he felt genuine joy. The power to love was always in his hands. He gave love because he wanted to. He loved with his heart. I felt the love, felt the happiness, but I could also call it quits any time, just like now. I don't love Victoria anymore. She's nothing to me. She can't hurt me a bit. I gave my all. I experienced it. That's enough. I turned to look at Victoria and laughed with relief. All right, what do you want to talk about? Victoria curled her lips into a smile that was more like a grimace. Sincere, can you honestly tell me, are you really with Sophie and Rose? Before she finished, I nodded without hesitation. Yes, they're both my girlfriends. Victoria's eyes showed strong resistance. I don't believe it. Sophie is so young, how could you do that? I replied, I just like them young. I interrupted Victoria again, looking at her with a meaningful glance. I just like them young and tender. The old ones are too wrinkled, like baked potatoes. With a pop, the sweet potato in Victoria's hand was crushed. She took 2 deep breaths, closed her eyes, and said, "Why would you say such things? Trying to get to me?" I shrugged. "Whatever, believe what you want." Victoria found a trash can, threw away the potato, and then wiped her hands with a tissue. I wrapped my coat tighter, followed beside her, and asked, "What do you really want to talk about?" "I don't want to be out here in the cold by the river." Suddenly, Victoria reached out to hook my arm. "Are you cold?" I immediately pulled away, took a step back, and said with disgust, "What are you doing?" Victoria froze, her eyes slowly turning red, looking very hurt. She said, sounding wronged, "You don't want me to touch you anymore, do you? Sincere, we're married." I chuckled. "A marriage of convenience, right? We play our own games. I don't have any obligation to act out a lovey-dovey drama with you." Victoria was stunned, muttering, "It shouldn't be like this." I asked, "Then how should it be?" "You were the one who wanted an open marriage. I accepted it. I have Sophie, I have Rose, and compared to them, I suddenly realized that the food at home is just so-so. I don't have an appetite for it now." Victoria shook her head desperately. "It's not like that. You've always only had me in your heart, right? All my first times were with you. How can you bear to treat me like this? You pursued me for so many years. How could you really go find other women?" I frowned. "So the open marriage was just your game? You set the rules, but you also drew a circle around me, believing I could never escape it. You flaunted your charm outside the circle, while I suffered inside. Watching you, that's what you wanted, right? Victoria, you're too greedy." The streetlight cast a halo from above. I stepped back several times, retreating out of the circle, and pointed to the ground. "Victoria, look carefully. I've long been outside the circle too." Victoria was like a statue pinned to the spot, staring fixedly at the circle on the ground, her whole body trembling slightly. After a long time, she took 2 steps forward, stood in the center of the circle, and then reached out to me, choking back tears. "I regret it, Sincere. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. Now let's both go back to this circle, okay? I'll break up with Ethan. I promise not to contact any other men." "You're the only one for me. Let's start over, please," Victoria cried, heartbroken. It suddenly reminded me of the day I held out the diamond ring and proposed to her, and she nodded, marking the end of my long journey of pursuing her with a perfect ending. I hugged her tightly, experiencing for the first time the feeling of crying with joy. But she said in a cold and distant voice, "Look at you, so pathetic." Now, watching her cry so profusely, begging so desperately, I didn't feel an ounce of pity, but rather more of a sense of relief. I put my hands in my coat pockets and calmly watched her. "Victoria, don't cry. Look at you, so pathetic." Victoria froze instantly, her pupils dilated slightly. I could clearly read the emotions in her eyes: shock, hurt, heartbreak, regret, torment, self-blame, pain. I comforted her. "Actually, it's not a big deal. I didn't say I'm divorcing you right away. I'll play outside for a few days and I'll come home. Rose is already looking for me. Goodbye." I turned around without hesitation and strode forward. Victoria was left alone in the same spot, her lonely figure stretched long by the streetlights. In the following days, I still didn't go home. After finishing my work at the company, I had to take turns spending time with Rose and Sophie. My schedule was packed. Victoria, however, was acting out of character. She came to the company every day after work, begging me to go home in a humble tone. I said speechlessly, "All right, they're both busy today. I'll go back with you." Victoria's eyes brightened instantly. After getting home, she personally cooked me a table of food. Before I could pick up my chopsticks, I received a call from Sophie. She said, "Sincere, I miss you." I said in a troubled voice, "I'm at home now." She said, "I'll have the driver pick you up." I replied, "But," she said, sounding wronged, "please?" Sophie was a very proud person. She wouldn't act like Rose, being a bit unreasonable. This was the first time she had asked me for something. I really couldn't refuse. I hastily grabbed my coat from the chair. "You eat by yourself, I'm not coming back tonight." The smile on Victoria's face froze. Her eyes turned incredibly sorrowful, her voice trembling as she said, "Sincere, today is my birthday." I replied indifferently, "Birthday? It happens every year. What's the big deal? Can you please not be so dramatic?" I quickly left. As I was driving the car out of the driveway, Victoria suddenly ran out and blocked the car. I impatiently rolled down the window and asked, "What do you want? Can't you do things without being so impulsive?" Victoria's eyes were filled with tears. Her voice choked with emotion. "You're not coming back, are you? Nothing I do matters anymore." I didn't answer. I just turned the car around and stepped on the gas. The car drove past Victoria and into the sunlight. A year later, I divorced Victoria. In that year, Victoria did many things, trying to win me back. She retraced the path I had taken, but what was the point? A raging fire had been extinguished by her pouring cold water on it, ladle by ladle. The embers were long cold and could not be rekindled. Everything she did was only for her own sake. After we received our divorce papers, I felt a sense of relief. Victoria looked at me, pleading with me to have one last meal with her. She asked, "Can we still be friends?" I replied, "No need." Sophie and Rose were waiting for me outside, and it was annoying. I waved at her and easily walked down the steps. I said, "Goodbye." Victoria's heart was torn. She reached out to grab my arm, but her hand froze in midair and then fell back down limply. She said, "Sincere, this time it's really goodbye." Sophie and Rose took turns attacking, questioning me. Now that I was single, when would I give them a commitment? But marriage was something I'd tried before and failed. Having barely escaped the cage, I didn't want to rush back into it. Would things be better with someone new? Maybe, but I didn't want to gamble. When Rose pressed me again, I told her frankly, "The circumstances of our first meeting were not quite right. I don't believe in the one. What if we get married and then this happens again?" Rose quickly raised her hand and swore, "I promise I'll be absolutely faithful to you. I'm very traditional. I would never have another man." I lowered her hand and said, "That's not what I mean. I'm afraid I might fall in love with someone else again. After all, I was with Sophie first." But when facing Rose's beauty, I felt a real attraction. Rose was speechless. After a moment, she pouted, "Sincere, you are such a..." I replied, "I am what?" "I am happy," I added. Sophie was also confused and asked, "Don't you want to settle down?" They didn't understand. My heart once belonged to Victoria, and then briefly to Rose and Sophie. Now, it belonged to Sincere. It had settled down a long time ago.